Sometimes only the UI part is only accessible to the particular user. Sometimes the functionality might not work. So you will have to test if the API is being called in the backend as well as the dashboard.
But when you actually logged in, there was a content cleanse change, which means that, hey, something is there in the application. We are pen testers, and I want more of you guys to get onto the real world side of things rather than having a vulnerable app. In a web application, what happens, let's say there is a file and it is intended for an user with an ID, you can see in the diagram as well, 1000. But what the attacker does is, I don't want to access my document, or I don't want my document. I want to access the document of other users. So he changes the ID from 1000 to 102. And the web application is so misconfigured that he says don't even mention it, and he just sends all of the data. You can see that it often works due to simple or commonly used passwords, and once inside the attackers, obviously if an attacker is able to guess the username and password, he can actually get access to the application and carry out further exploitation techniques. Again, I would like to give the disclaimer, all of these practical videos are given because for educational purposes. This is not something that you should attempt at your work, organization or place.
Today we are going to be covering three of the major bugs that we are seeing in our pen test day in and day out. The folks who are going to be talking in this podcast are going to pretty much blast apart right now, because these are the main vulnerabilities that attackers look out for. So right from broken access control to brute forcing and IDOR, right? So IDOR is insecure direct object reference. So these are vulnerabilities that beginners typically miss. So if you actually follow this, you may be able to reproduce these issues in pen tests that you're doing. Also, these vulnerabilities that we are going to talk about, they comprise of like 50% of the findings that we actually report to our clients. Right, so stay tuned in, guys. It's going to be a fantastic podcast. Guys, please subscribe to our channel. We are pushing out a lot of content on YouTube. We are also putting a lot of content on LinkedIn, also Instagram and other channels. So please follow us. There's a lot of content that's coming in through this year and next year.
Hi everyone, welcome to today's podcast. Today we will be covering mastering web vulnerabilities, mostly broken access control, brute forcing and IDOR. Myself, Joseph Simon. I have Tarak, the associate security consultant at Redfox Security. So can you give me a brief about what we will be covering today in terms of the subject or topics?
So I will just give a brief introduction to the users as well. So before we jump off into the videos or the practical sessions, let me just introduce to what we actually do at Redfox Security. So apart from sending client reports or from end-to-end penetration testing, right from ranging from web applications to Active Directories, we have a number of other sections as well, which we deal with. And apart from reporting and apart from delivering pen test reports, we also have training academies. We also have YouTube shorts, courses that you can always check on our YouTube channel as well as on training.redfoxset.com. Giving a brief introduction of myself, I am Tarak Sakardande. I work as a security consultant at Redfox Security, and today's podcast is going to be related to authentication and authorization. So can you just give them a brief of what else have I talk about?
Yeah, so today we will be covering the broken access control. The first topic will be brute forcing. So brute forcing is a type of attack vector in which the attacker, what they do is they take a common set of usernames, a list of usernames and passwords, and they try to log in, brute force the particular login page or login functionality of a particular application to get account takeover of particular users and do malicious activities with that.
Okay. All right. So without further ado, let's just jump on to the slide.
Yeah.
Okay, so moving on to the slide. So Joe might have given you a brief introduction of the topic. So let me just let you know that what brute forcing is actually about. So It's like brute forcing is basically a attacker tries to guess the username or a password of a valid account. So it's more of a guesswork. So when it comes to web applications, what happens is that there are two things that are very majorly important in a web application. So it's like whenever you access a web application, probably you see the login page.
Yeah.
And now even if you are familiar with CTFs or Pentest, it is the first thing that comes around. And you might be thinking, hey, how do I get along or how do I bypass this login page? So one such technique that is mainly common in web applications is brute forcing. So it's like guessing, it's guesswork. But obviously, again, we are pen testers, so we are going to automate this stuff because all the time you're not trying to guess the credentials. So that is why burp suit comes. So again, moving on to the slide, I will introduce you to burp suit as well. You can see that it often works due to simple or commonly used passwords. And once inside the attackers, obviously, if an attacker is able to guess the username and password, he can actually get access to the application and carry out further exploitation techniques. So the real-time scenarios, let me just give you a brief introduction. The attacker guesses a password of an online account after multiple failed attempts by systematically trying combinations until succeeding. I think that was something that I just discussed a bit back. Secondly, a cyber criminal employs a dictionary attack against a popular social media platform, exploiting common passwords. Same thing again. Third one is something that is very really close to me and the security team as well. Yeah. So once we were dealing with a web application and we were trying a number of exploitation techniques, but all of us were in a deep confusion. What is the way around a login page? What is the actual way? So during the login, we could have a reset mail. And when we got the reset mail of the user account, it had a 6-digit OTP. So briefly, when I talked about this topic, it was more of guessing the username and password, but it's not actually all about the credentials. It can be something like OTP as well. And or these OTPs, they are 6-digit or 4-digit and 6-digit numbers. So even that can be brute forced. So moving on to a small example before we jump into the practicals, you can see, I will also give you a brief introduction to what we are going to do with burp suit as well. You can see that there is a login form in front of you. So let's say in this scenario, the attacker knows the username of the victim user, and that is Mike, and he enters a random password. So let's say test@123 or something. You intercept the login request. So what burp suit is basically doing, it's intercepting the login request, and you use a tool called as intruder. So can you just let them know what intruder is?
So intruder is basically used for any type of to send multiple requests. Okay. So this process can be automated by scripting as well. But burp suit provides it like a common place in which we will be able to automate this stuff. So what typically happens in intruder is we can set the payload numbers, okay, and the payloads that we will be going to be sending to the web application, okay, and this process can be automated by using intruder.
Yeah, basically that the first point that I said, instead of manually trying different possible values, burp suit is just going to automate that stuff for you. Moving on to the intruder tool, what you do is you basically enter the random password and you are going to add a payload position around it. And next what you do is you move on to the payload section and you select an attack type. So there are a number of attack types that you can deal with, but major ones that I personally use are the snipers and the cluster bombs. So let me just give you a short introduction to it. So sniper is basically targeting one field at a time. So it's like the username, but you are trying to brute force the password. Cluster bomb on the other side, let's say you don't know the username nor the password. And then at that time you use the combination of random usernames as well as passwords to get in through the login page of an application. Next, you find a word list. It's very simple. There are word lists. Internet, again, it has made it very easier for all of us. It has number of word lists available. So this is one of those word lists that you could use. I personally even use this one. So what you do is copy the password values from the word list. You set things up. You move on to the configuration tab. You set all of those values in the word list. And finally, you start the intruder and you like obviously you check the length tab, and now you can actually observe in the presentation as well. When the password was test, the length had changed. So and even if you move to the response section of the burp suite request, you can see that when the password entered was test, the server gave you a 200 OK response, which means that you have actually logged into the web application.
Yeah. How can you find out if like we have logged in or not? Like, is it based on some type of status code and content length?
Yes, exactly. So when you can see, even in this request, there were a number of payloads that you were automating or trying, like shadow, master, all of this. But they gave you a similar length, right? But when you actually logged in, there was a content length change, which means that, hey, something is there in the application which is giving me more of content. That would probably be when you're actually getting access to the web application. So you got a 200 OK response, and also there was a change in length. So that is how you just make sure that your brute force attempt was successful.
Yes.
And if you don't get any length changes, then probably your brute force attempt was really not. And you can always log back into the web application again. So using this password, if you want to cross check, but it's fine. Second, that is just what I told. So you can log in with the cracked credentials again, and you can see that you have successfully logged in into the account details.
Yeah.
Yep. So there are a number of tools that you could probably use for brute forcing. Like, can you name some of them?
Yeah. So apart from the request response brute forcing, or using parameters to be brute forced, we can brute force the directories of a particular web application. There are multiple tools for that, the Buster and multiple tools. You can even pass it through curl request and automate by using a Python script and all. You can use wfast to send request response and automate that by capturing the particular request in a particular text file or a particular file, and then calling it during your wfast request.
Okay.
Yeah.
So before we move on to the practical section of this vulnerability, let me give you a small disclaimer. First of all of these things and all of these practicals and the content that is being shared with you in this video is completely for educational purposes. Please do not try this at your organization or at your place, because trying and performing all of these things without any instructions can get you in trouble, and Redfox Security holds no responsibility against it. Yep. So let's move on to the practical section. So you can see this is the burp suite that I was talking about, and we have our web application. But let me just introduce you to a small pen testing scenario as well before I move on. So whenever it's a pen test, mainly these labs were configured in a way that will deliver a real world pen test environment for you. This is because all of these examples are laid out with a foundation that will help you out in your pen tests. So normally you will get a access file, and there will be a URL of the web application, and also there will be a normal user and an administrator user. Now we are talking about brute forcing, so we are not going to consider that we already know the password of one user, but I'm just going to walk you through the process.
So what you mean to say is, during a pen test, the clients actually provide the username and password for that particular for the users with different privileges, right?
Yes.
Okay. And so you are going to test this with that particular methodology in mind.
Yeah, exactly. Because again, we are pen testers, and I want more of you guys to get onto the real world side of things rather than having a vulnerable app, and that's what matters. So, and again, answering your question, it really depends on your client as well. It depends on the type of testing that you're doing, black box, white box, and gray box.
Yeah.
But usually 70% of the cases, you always get a user from the client. So let's first use that. Let's say you know the username again, the example. So what you do is, you know the username, and now you don't know the password. So you type a test password. You move to burp suite, again, the tools that always comes handy. You turn the intercept on, and you intercept this login request. Now, when you get to this page, you can see that there is a post login page with your username and your password. Now, what you do is you send this to intruder. You move to the intruder tab again. Scroll down. Just a sec. So what you do is you set a payload position around a randomly set password, that is test. Okay, and you add a payload position around it. You move to the payload sides of things. Now, so basically it's like you don't know the password. And now you're going to automate stuff around this.
So this is taken like when we are trying to brute force the password, so we have to mention that particular parameter.
Yeah, exactly. So move to the payloads tab. Now what you could do is you can take the word list from the internet, which I had shown you in the slides as well, but I'm just gonna probably do a better thing right now. It means I just downloaded it on my local system and we copy certain values. Oh, my bad. And what you do is you move to intruder, you paste this, and then that's done. It's a simple list. Again, walking you through to the configuration a bit. It's a simple list. You have your values over here, and then you click start attack. There's nothing fancy configurations that you need to do here. Okay, so there was a tip that I gave you guys during the slides, and that was if you click on the len tab, which obviously even I do, it's more convenient. You can see that there was a len change when the password was QWERTY. And you can check the request. The username was Aaron, the password was QWERTY, and in the response you can see that you got the 200 OK response. Now what you can do is, again, cross-checking if you want to. I mean, you have to. So you move here and you say QWERTY, and I think you must be able to log in to the application. Oh, my bad, because I think I forgot to turn off intercept. Yeah. Yep, you are logged in. You can go to the profile section, and now you can see that you are actually logged in as Aaron. So that is about brute forcing.
Yeah, so for this particular attack scenario, attack vector, what are the suggestions or the recommendations that you give typically?
Okay, so I mean the best ones are actually implementing rate limiting and user account lockout. So you did say in the intruder tab there were a number of requests that were made, but if the web application was configured enough in a good way, it could have just locked you out. So this happens. A very common example is if you are accessing your bank applications and you enter a wrong password like once or twice, you probably get frustrated because of the account lockout, but that's actually a good mechanism. Secondly, implementing CAPTCHAs. It's also one way to go about it, and obviously you can't send multiple requests because again you have to verify those CAPTCHAs as well. And the last, I think, is a very good method and always a great policy that is always followed in no matter you are in web applications or anywhere, is setting up a unique password with a good password policy. That is making sure that you use symbols and numbers, integers, a mixture of all of them.
Apart from that, if it is possible, do implement MFA as well. It is a security best practice to implement MFA in your applications which are critical.
Yeah, basically, and main thing why I really like that point is because even if I get the password, now I need to know the MFA. So brute forcing is basically that really did not make any impact as such.
But MFA can be bypassed as well, right?
Yeah, but again, even if it's a OTP or a MFA, it can be bypassed, and you have to make sure these codes, the multi-factor authentication codes or your OTPs are actually, they are a mixture of integers as well as letters. So it's complicated. It's not as simple as a 6-digit integer.
Yeah, it's depends in depth, like implementing each and every security mechanism to slow the attacker or the adversary down, right?
Yeah. But even I think the best practice is implementing rate limiting, is because even if it's MFA, even the attacker won't be able to guess it in
Right.
any way possible.
Yeah, the account will be locked out, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, so we have completed our first vulnerability, that is brute forcing in depth. So what we discussed was the ways the attacker might be able to exploit this particular vulnerability, its mitigation, its like practical aspect as well. So moving on to the second vulnerability, exploring the broken access control. So can you give me a brief about this particular vulnerability?
surely, broken access control. Yeah. Is it correct? Okay. So broken access control is one of the most common vulnerabilities that even we find in our pen test, and no wonder it is actually named. It has the first. It holds the first rank in even the OWASP top 10. That is a open source web application security project, and there's a good reason. So I can completely second that fact, is because even in my pen test, or I must say our pen test, there are a lot of times that we have seen access controls to be more common than injection attacks.
Yes.
So that was all the hype about broken access control. So you can look at the slide, you can see that there's Tom who is trying to hold the door with all of his might, but Jerry's like all jacked up and he's like just breaking the whole door. So here, if I relate this to a web application, what is happening is the weak access controls are the doors, which probably the developers are hoping that it's a very good mechanism, but pen testers or attackers are completely breaking it through. Yes. So a real life example can be as simple. I really love to explain by giving examples as well. So just to be with me for a sec. So let's say that you have a beautiful house and everything's good, but at the back there's a window that's broken. Now, that's the problem. Now, what's going to happen is that the broken window implies that the access control, again, read through, because I am closely trying to relate a real life example with our web applications. Yeah. So the broken window implies that the access control of the house is weak. There are 3 points of contacts, that is the attacker, the victim, and the vulnerable point. So again, the vulnerable point becomes the broken window, the victim becomes your house, and the attacker is obviously the robber or the burglar.
Yeah, can you show this in a real world web application scenario? Like what are the like scenarios that you have come across like while testing for in web application?
Okay, so in web applications, broken access controls means accessing, its basic definition, unauthorized users are able to access data that they are not authorized to. Coming to our question again, it's like, accessing administrator functionalities, like creating users, managing users, deleting users, creating comments as an administrator, and a number of functionalities. That is what I have personally came across, and I'm pretty sure a lot of pen testers have done as well. Yeah. So again, we are diving deep into the explanation of the web application perspective. If you look at the diagram, you can see that in a normal case scenario with good access controls being implemented, unauthorized users would really not be able to gain access to the data. But in case of weak access controls, the unauthorized user is basically granted the access to the, you can call it a data or anything like that. Don't worry, things like this will be more clearer when we come to the practical sides of things. But again, there are a lot of people have this question. When you're a consumer, you have this question, okay, all of these vulnerabilities are going on, but what kind of impact does it have? Yeah. So one tip that I would like to lay out is, because all of the things are being digitalized right now. Yeah. A lot of our information is on the web apps, it's on Android, or our phones, all of this stuff. So we need to secure it. And access control, if an attacker basically gets into a web application as an authorized user, he can fiddle around with your data. A good example would be the Domino's data breach as well that happened, where a number of people's data was leaked, and these guys, they put it on dark web as well, and you were actually able to access that site and check if your account information was leaked or not. Moving on to some real-time scenarios to give you an example as well. A bank customer views another customer's account details by manipulating the URL. A regular user edits or comments these were some examples I laid out before as well. Yeah. They can comment on a post by intercepting a modified network request that was meant for administrators. An attacker can access web applications by making use of common word lists. This was something that was covered in brute forcing. An attacker is capable of performing administrative functionalities like creating and managing user accounts. So I think all of this stuff, I covered it back, but still fine. You can have a read through again. So this is a small example before we go to the practical side of things. Yeah, demonstration. So a bank customer is viewing another customer's account details by manipulating the URL. So as you can see that the name of the website is Vulnerable Bank and it shows you the account details of the user Mike. So the attacker is like, okay, I already have this user account, but I want to check the account details of other users. So what he's going to see, he's going to enter the name John, because it's maybe the attacker, we are assuming a scenario where the attacker is targeting the user John. So he enters his name in the URL, he presses enter, and now you can actually see that he's able to access the account details of the user John instead of Mike. Yeah. So basically it's like the access control is compromised. Now why is this happening? If you ask me, probably the web application is not, checking the cookies or the user sessions that has been for the specific user. So even if let's say the attacker has compromised Mike's account, but is still able to view John's account, is because the session IDs or his cookies are not being checked by the web application in a way that was intended. Yeah. This is again another scenario where a regular user edits or comments on a post by intercepting. I think you can walk through this as well if you want.
Yeah. So in this particular example, what we are trying to demonstrate is the access control is implemented on the client side, that is the browser or the web application HTML interface. So what we typically do is we intercept that particular request, okay? And and in the request we manipulate that parameter to some other user, okay? So to post this particular comment as some other user and forward the request. So what this does is basically we are able to post a particular comment or do a particular functionality as some other user. Yeah. As you can see in the slides itself, we will be demonstrating it in the practicals as well. Yeah. So can we move on to the practical part?
Surely. Before moving on to the practical demonstration, 1 second I would like to give you the disclaimer that Redfox Security does not hold any responsibility for if you get into trouble, because all of these things are mentioned for educational purposes. Please do not try this at your home, work, organization or anywhere else, because if you get in trouble, we are not responsible for that. So please keep this in mind, be ethical. Yeah. Beware and be ethical. So, okay, I will just brief you out to the practical again. So here was our logged in user, that is Aaron, which is the normal user you can see if you navigate to the profile. And if you go to the incognito window, again, I had given a brief about this. That's just fine. Yeah. So we are going to log in into the administrator user account. So now again, I would like to hint on the fact that we are going to learn all of these vulnerabilities with a pen testing perspective in mind. So let's say you have both of these users. Just a sec. You can copy the password, or I think I would go with the traditional way of doing it all by myself. Yes. We move to the administrator profile. Okay, so access control, broken access control, what you're going to do is, if you have good observation skills, you can see that administrator user has the ability to create users as well as manage users. Yeah. And yeah, but if you move to the normal account, which was Aaron, he was not actually able to create users or manage users in the web application. So what's going to happen is that if you click create user, you can check the endpoint as well, that is create user. Okay, so if you check the endpoint, what's going to happen, the normal way to go for broken access control is that what you can do is you can copy this URL and you can paste it in the session of the normal user, logged in user. Now you can see that actually the normal user was able to access the create user functionality by just manipulating the URL.
Yeah.
And that guy was not authorized to do that.
Sometimes only the UI part is only accessible to the particular user. Yeah. Sometimes the functionality might not work. So you will have to test the APIs being called in the backend as well as the dashboard, which is displayed on the when you paste that particular URL parameter. Yeah.
Yep. I would like to add one point here as well.
Yeah.
So what he is saying is actually right. So it's like you can the access control part is not really finished here. So there might be cases in your pen test as well where you can come across engagements or pen test where you are actually able to access the functionality, but you are not really able to exploit it in any way. Execute it. Yeah. Like let's say now we are going, but in this case, obviously you're going to execute it again. So we were able to access the administrator create user endpoint. What we're going to do is we're going to create a new account. Let's say attacker77@gmail.com. I'm so sorry about that. That was the username part of things. So you can enter in the email, a random email, set the password, and you can actually, that is where things go haywire. I mean, dangerous. Things become dangerous because you can actually, you access the endpoint, and as a normal user, you are able to create an administrator account on the web application. Let me just upload a file because it's necessary. Yep, I just added a test file as well, and I think we are good to go. If I click on submit, you can see that the attacker has been created successfully. Now what we are going to do is, the user is created as administrator. We are going to log back in as the newly set account with the creds that we just set right now. And you can see that you are now able to access the admin panel. Yeah. And if you click on manage user, and you can now create users like before, and now if you click on manage user, you get the whole data of all the users in the application, right from their emails, their names. You can delete a user, you can reset the password, and as easy as it sounds and as easy the demonstration really feels, that is something that I have came across a lot of times in my pen test, and no wonder I don't debate the fact that even OWASP has it on their first rank.
Yeah, it is the most critical vulnerability. Exactly. The reason for that is it is really easy to exploit. There is no particular sophisticated tools that are used or payloads that are used that are sophisticated. It's just a simple parameter manipulation or URL manipulation that you can get a privilege escalation or a account takeover vulnerability, and we can exploit that.
Yes, that, as he rightly said, this was a case of a privilege escalation via broken access control, because we started off as a normal user, ended up as an administrator user in the application. So let me just log out of this and log back in as, we'll just do it ahead, no problem. So
the next topic is IDOR. The IDOR is basically a subset of broken access control,
right? Before we actually jump into the IDOR, let me just give the viewers a small, how to mitigate this vulnerability as well. So, first of all, what you need to do is you have to implement role-based access controls. So, what in brief, it's basically like only the users that are authorized to access the particular resource, only those should be able to do it. Secondly, you can see that there are authorization and authentication checks as well. So this can be a case, let's say, even if a person is able to access that URL, the server should be, configured in a way where it is still checking the user session or the user cookie. And now it's like, hey, this guy is trying to access this URL, but is he really configured to access it?
Is he really going to execute that particular request?
Yeah. So that's it. It's very simple, like the mitigations as well. Yep. Bonus tip as well, again, I had been hinting on right from the start. It's basically try accessing all the unique endpoints accessible to the administrator user in the session of the normal user to check if there is a chance of broken access control. Again, as the meme says, the chances of anything happening is either 50-50, either it happens or it does not. Yeah. Okay, so let's move on.
Yeah. So we have completed what the broken access control is, how the exploitation stages we go through, and the mitigation part as well. So the next topic for today's podcast is indirect object reference, that is IDOR. Can you shed some light on that?
Sure. So insecure direct object reference, I would like to call it as a brother or a sister of broken access control. So it's basically similar, it's the same thing, but again, ID is the,
Yeah, there are some
ID comes into
nuances
play.
to that, right?
Yeah, exactly. An ID comes into play. That's it. Previously, we were fiddling around with URLs, but now we will be doing the same with the IDs. So again, I like to give examples, so we're going to continue with that as well. So back in time when I was in college and we had to attend a particular fest of a college, we always had this annoying security and they were like, you can't get in.
Yeah.
So what we used to do, obviously we being sneaky kids back in time, we used to show the ID card of our friend and we would just get the access to the college fest. Yeah. So again, moving on to the web application perspective of things, because obviously this podcast is about web applications and not really getting into college fest. So what we are going to do is, in a web application, what happens, let's say there is a file and it is intended for an user with an ID, you can see in the diagram as well, 1000. But what the attacker does is, I don't want to access my document, or I don't want my document, I want to access the document of other users. So he changes the ID from 1000 to 102. And the web application is so misconfigured that he says, don't even mention it, and he just sends all of the data. Yeah. So examples again include altering a URL or parameter value to access another user's profile. I gave you an example of a document, but trust me, really, it goes to a whole different scenario. Likewise, you can access another user's profile, invoice, confidential document that are not originally accessible. So again, even in my pen test, I have came across this vulnerability a lot of times, and I have even managed to take account takeovers always. We'll give an example of that as well in the practical demonstration. So some of these real-time scenarios is that a standard user can comment as other users in the web application, like for example, administrator user. A standard user can access dashboards of administrators. An attacker can download a confidential document again, and a user gains administrative privileges. Again, you can read through all of these slides. This will be more understandable when you move on to practical sides of things. Again, before the practical, I would like to give you one more disclaimer, is that please understand that all of these things are made for educational purposes. Do not try this at your organization, home or work, because in case you get in trouble, Redfox Security is not really responsible for it. Yep. So let's move on to the practical. What we have is, we have a normal user, that is Aaron, and we have our administrator user as well. So go to Aaron's profile and you move to shop. So what we are going to do in this case is, we are going to comment as a administrator. Yeah, administrator user. So you click on view details here, and you can see that there is a OpenSuite comment section that has been created. Now, what we are going to do is, let's type a review. Let's say, that's a cool chair. And you're going to move to burp. Okay, you're just going to normal. So before, actually, I would really like to discuss it. Before you in pen test, I would really suggest people to not just go for exploitations all the time. Yeah. Sometimes it's more of understanding the functionality of the web application. So in this case, let's say you type a review. You can see that the review is being posted. And now what you could do is, you can now use burp let's say this is a test review. You can use burp now and you can intercept the request. And if you intercept the request here and scroll down, can you like give the viewers a spoiler?
Yeah. So over here we have already intercepted the request, and the user ID mentioned of that particular user is 5. Okay. So what we will be doing is we will be manipulating that particular user ID to administrator user's ID, so that we might be able to post the comment or the review as an admin.
Yes. Now, yes, exactly. So there are ways to go about it as well. Now we know the ID, so we can see that while again, I would like to repeat the part. When we are testing this functionality before we get into the exploitation part of things. You can see it means that while posting a comment, a user's ID is visible in the request. So please keep this in mind. Now, when we move to I would like to turn intercept off because I want you to get to know the user administrator's ID as well. In a pen test, realistically, you have the administrator's access. You can just go to his profile, try to comment and then drop the request. You'll get the ID. But again, there are cases where people, they just store it in the source code. So if you navigate to the source code, you can see that the admin ID here has been mentioned as 7. So that is how one thing to go about for CTFs, but in pen test, I really don't think so. You need to, guess the ID because you already know.
So what he means is sometimes you might find some hidden gems in the page source or the JavaScript files, which are dependency file, which loads when a particular application is running on your browser.
Let's call it a pen test review. Okay. And now I'm going to intercept this. And now what we are going to do is we are going to just change the ID from 5 to our administrator user's ID. Okay. And if you turn intercept off right now, you can see, and if you scroll down, you can see that now the comment is actually posted on behalf of the administrator user and not Aaron. That was our logged in session, as you can see. So that was the first scenario. And now the second scenario that we are going to discuss is actually about escalating this IDOR vulnerability to a potential account takeover. So this exactly happened in one of my client tests as well. So it was amazingly, it had access controls in place, but you know what happened? These guys actually leaked the ID in the profile picture of the user.
Okay.
So using the profile, when I opened the profile picture of a normal user in a new tab, I could get the ID of that particular user. So what happened is, again, I was, going through a series of things. I was testing different functionalities. And what happened is that I could see a change password functionality in my user. Yeah. And there the ID was visible in the URL. So I was like, hey, what if I actually change this ID to that of the other users whose profile picture was visible, and then, take an account takeover. So let's move on to that. That is exactly what we are going to do in this vulnerability right now. So you are into the reset password functionality, and you can see that you are logged in as the administrator user account here as well. So let me just bring it to the default table. Okay, so now we are going to intercept again the reset password. You are going to navigate to reset password again. Let's set a random password, test@123, and you're going to use burp suit. If you click on update password and if you check the request, you can see
the user ID parameter is mentioned, which we might be able to manipulate. Or in some cases there might be server-side validation with respect to that particular token or the authentication mechanism implemented. So in that particular scenarios, it might not be possible. But we always try to check whatever we can, right? We just try to be as stringent with our testing as possible.
Yes, yeah. And it's true because even if you are manipulating the ID, The thing is, the web application, if there are server-side checks, we will move to mitigation parts. But let me just, if you have brought that point, so let us just clear it out for the audience. So you might be wondering, hey, what's happening? Because the web application is configured in a way where it's not actually checking the cookie or the token of the user, and it's solely relying on the ID. You can just check in the request as well, it is solely relying on ID. Now there are a lot of applications, so even in Pentest, it might be, you would be like, hey, I'm just close to, exploiting the IDOR vulnerability, and you probably think that now I'm going to report the account takeover as well. But access controls are in place because the server is still checking your cookie and your token as well. But in IDOR, specifically what happens, this application has weak access controls, and all it is doing is checking the ID. So you are going to forward this request. Okay, you are going to change the user ID, and let's say you already have test@password123, test@123 set. Now, if you turn intercept off, you can see that the password is updated. Now let's just check if our vulnerability has succeeded or not. Log out of this session. You can say admin@gmail.com. Log in with the newly set password that we did before, and you click login. Just a sec. Oh, my bad. Maybe it's some issue from my side. I will just go through the process again. So we log into the normal user account, we go to the profile, we click on reset password, we set a new password, test@12345, let's say. And now we go to Bolt Suite, we intercept this request, and we change the ID from 5 to 7, which was the ID of the administrator user. Now you click forward, and you turn the intercept off. Now you can see that nothing really is showing, but now if you log out of this application again, and I hope this should work as intended, which I'm pretty sure it will. Test@12345, right? Yep. You can see we actually now are able to access the administrator profile. So now if you click on go to admin profile, you can see that you were, by actually manipulating the ID, you were able to perform a potential account takeover on behalf, potential account takeover of the administrator user account. So that is it about IDOR. Any questions that you want to ask regarding this?
No. Can you explain the mitigations that we will be implementing apart from the server-side validation for each and every user?
Okay, so I think a lot of these mitigations were actually discussed while we were performing the practical as well, but that's fine. I will still go through it again. So one thing is you can implement UUIDs that are basically integers, that are big size integers, and they are hard to guess. Secondly, there are, it's like you can replace direct object reference with indirect mapping. So it's something like you can use unique integers, or let's say a combination, for example, capital A with some stars, asterisks, symbols.
Yeah. So what he means to say is remove the object reference, and based on the session ID or the authentication mechanism token implemented, you can base the authentication on that, apart from the object reference that is included in the URL or the post parameter of the application, of the request.
Yes. So mainly don't make your web application solely focus on the IDs. Also make sure that cookies and tokens are still being checked by the server. And last, again, server side is the same thing again. Yep.
Okay. So now that we have finished all the vulnerabilities, I think we should just give a brief of mitigation for each and every vulnerabilities.
Okay. So
like just a recap for that.
All right. So we started off with brute forcing. A mitigation for that was implementing rate limitings and user account lockouts. Then for broken access control was role-based access controls. So the application knows only those authorized users should be able to access the specific data. IDOR, again, as you rightly said, one amazing example he gave was remove the direct mappings, and what you do is you make the server check for the cookies and apart from IDs as well. Also, you can use unique identifiers. And again, I would like to give the disclaimer, all of these practical videos are given because for educational purposes. This is not something that you should attempt at your work, organization or place, because if you get in trouble, Redfox Security is not really responsible for it.
Thank you for the amazing practicals and the information covered in this podcast.
Yeah. Apart from all of this, we will be always delivering number of podcasts and contents. You can always check it out on our YouTube. Apart from web applications, we have certain videos on Active Directories, hardware related stuff as well. There's literally a plethora of a lot of things are there. You can always check it on YouTube. Again, there are podcasts. Recently, we had Active Directory podcast as well. And we are, apart from all of this and the content, we also have a training courses for red teaming, web applications, hardware. These are also available on training.redfoxset.com. The link will be in the description. And it was really fun being with you guys, and we are always going to create all of this content for you. And if you have any doubts, you can always reach out to us. So yes, on that note, let's just end the podcast.